There seems to be a big gap between what public health officials in the United Kingdom, and England in particular, are saying about e-cigarettes and what we're saying here in the US. What do you think explains that discrepancy?
Both England and some scientists here are looking at the best science, and we see the same thing. E-cigarettes are way less harmful than cigarettes, and they can and do help smokers switch if they can't quit. I think there's a very strong concern here that is more focused on both teens and the evil of the big tobacco industry that tends to distort the science and lead to exaggerated harms and omission of benefits.
So you're saying researchers are coming to that conclusion even though the FDA has not yet reviewed it and made that determination?
Yes, I think that's correct. The science has actually gotten extremely strong, especially in the last 3 to 4 years, and we've been following it closely. Probably the most powerful study is a randomized trial, which is the gold standard, that showed that in 12-month follow-up, e-cigarettes doubled the successful quit rate among smokers compared to nicotine replacement therapy, which is FDA approved. But it takes a long time for the government to essentially make those kind of strong statements.
So what do we know right now about the risks of e-cigarettes relative to cigarettes?
I think what we know for sure is that based on all the biomarkers of harm that we know from cigarettes, that they are far fewer and far lower in e-cigarettes than cigarettes.
That statement can't be made because you can't judge the long-term risk or benefit.
And that's true that we don't know the long-term risks and benefits, and we won't for 50 years. But we know enough now from the science of the biomarkers of harm, especially cancer, that show us that there are so few of those chemicals and at such low levels that e-cigarettes are biologically much less harmful in terms of exposures. They're not harmless, but they are dramatically less harmful.
If the truth is as plain as that, what do you think explains the alarm right now around e-cigarettes?
Well, I think there is concern, and it's legitimate, that teens are using them at much higher rates. And there is a concern about nicotine and nicotine addiction, even though nicotine itself doesn't cause the cancer, heart disease, or lung ailments that cigarettes do. It's the smoke and the carbon monoxide. Nicotine's not harmless. And there is a concern that teens who use it might get addicted and then go on to cigarette smoking. But the evidence doesn't really support that at a level that we ought to panic about it.
When you think about a cigarette and what kills you in a cigarette, what comes to mind? I'm thinking tar, carbon monoxide.
Correct. The tar is a catch-all term for the essentially junk in the burning of tobacco. And that includes 69 known human cancer-causing chemicals, of which 10 or 12 are very potent. And we know what those are, and therefore we can look for them in the blood of people who've switched to e-cigarettes. And the FDA's own study of that, which is published in the New England Journal of Medicine, confirms that of 45 biomarkers, only 12 were detectable in e-cigarettes, and of those, none were at levels that approach those of cigarettes. So the biomarkers are very clear that there are less of them, and of those that are there, they are much less harmful.
If every American smoker switched to an e-cigarette, would public health benefit?
I think there's no question. Public health would benefit dramatically if everybody switched completely to e-cigarettes and we made cigarettes obsolete. That would also solve the teen problem because we wouldn't be afraid of the gateway to cigarettes if nobody wanted cigarettes anymore. And our study suggested that if 10% of current smokers switched completely to e-cigarettes every year for the next 10 years, so 10% a year for 10 years means 100% switch within 10 years, we'd save as much as 6 to 7 million lives who otherwise would die from cigarette smoking, and 87 million quality life years would be gained from that scenario of switching completely in 10 years to e-cigarettes.
So what do you think then of the hundreds of cases of lung disease, mysterious lung disease, tied to vaping?
So the common sense explanation of that is it's a sudden outbreak that happened 10 years after e-cigarettes came on the market. And I think all the evidence we've seen from the FDA and the CDC reports is that these cases are people who bought marijuana oils on the street made either illegally or in a sort of a street version, like a street drug, a dirty street drug. We haven't seen a single case that a commercially made legitimate e-cigarette that smokers are using has caused any of these illnesses. And I would say for smokers, they should not be scared by what they're seeing, and that e-cigarettes should still be used instead of cigarettes if they've already switched.
Why the skepticism, do you think, from other researchers?
The fear is that this is a Trojan horse by the big tobacco companies, and since they've done some things in the past that are very untrustworthy, I think people are very reluctant to give credit for the fact that someone could switch to an e-cigarette, even though the science is incontrovertible. The emotion of the disgust with the industry, I think, makes people forget that we've got 38 million smokers that we have to help. And we're here to help those smokers.
It sounds like you're saying that we are fighting e-cigarettes with the fury we wish we had fought cigarettes with decades ago.
Yes, and I think we've forgotten that 120 years ago, the disruptive technology was the cigarette rolling machine that literally caused this epidemic of lung cancer and other diseases. And now we have an opportunity 120 years later to get rid of the cigarette with a new technology that delivers nicotine in a very satisfying way without the major harms of burning tobacco. If we lose this opportunity, I think we will have blown the single biggest public health opportunity we've ever had in 120 years to get rid of cigarettes and replace them with a much safer form of nicotine for everybody.